Bear down, Chicago. It's the Bears Squad, sponsored by Gametime. Everything Chicago Bears, every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Windy City. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From Soldier Field to the next great chapter, the Bears Squad Show starts now.
Welcome into the Bears Squad Show here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. My name is Joe George. Find me on all social media platforms at Joe George Radio, joined by, as always, Lauren Cox, host of Locked On Bears. And today, Taylor Dahl joins us. Taylor, before we really get going, tell people where they can find you, your Bears podcast, your Jag stuff you're doing. Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so Bears-wise, I'm on, it's called Making Monsters. My podcast is Making Monsters at Second City Gridiron. So you'll find me on Twitter at Taydal1010XL, but you'll find all of my stuff through whether it's Second City Gridiron or Windy City Gridiron, depending what it is, because all the written stuff is on Windy City, but all the social side, and then obviously YouTube is on Second City Gridiron. But I also host a show called Helmets and Heels in Jacksonville, we're the Jaguars flagship, but we talk a little bit of NFL and college football in general. So you can find that on all different, YouTube, all the social channels at 1010XL.
So obviously we've got a lot of Bears stuff to get into. Last week was the start of training camp. Our first show it felt a little negative doing it just because the reports last week were pretty brutal about what we were hearing from Caleb Williams and everything going on with the offense. But a week later, it feels a little bit different. So we'll talk about Caleb, what we're hearing. A really interesting comment, I thought, from DJ Moore that we heard today, talking about the new culture that's being built. We'll talk about the offensive line, all of that stuff here on the show today. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, guys, we'll start here. So I want to read this Ben Johnson quote, and then we'll kind of react to it. So he was asked about Caleb Williams' growth, and this is what he had to say. He said, "I probably just see growth. He is so much more comfortable right now. He's doing the work behind the scenes and that no one else is seeing, and we're starting to see the dividends of that being paid from it." And look, the reports are much better about Caleb, that there's been success to DJ Moore, to Colston Loveland. It's all more positive. It's all more positive this week. So Taylor, I'll start with you here. I'm curious what your view from, where you watch the Bears from, what you're hearing, what you're seeing from Caleb Williams at camp just a week after a brutal start.
Yeah, I think you have to start with saying relax a little bit because I think, number one, the Ben Johnson offense we know is going to be a lot more difficult, a lot more intricate than anything that Caleb's had before. And we also know everything that happened last year, too. It was I don't know quite how much of the developing was happening of Caleb last year because of everything that was going on. So because of that, Ben Johnson not only is trying to kind of put this playbook and the new pieces of the offense and almost all new offensive line, thank goodness, all into play, but he's also trying to develop Caleb Williams and get Caleb's mechanics right and the footwork and all of the things that we kind of started to worry about last year. All of those things are having to happen right now. And so to me, when you're looking at 5-6 days of camp, you've got to sometimes say, breathe, relax. There's a lot of things that Caleb's taking in at one time and not on a pretty difficult offensive scheme that he's going to be learning. So there's a lot of things in that. I think that it's positive. Number one, you're also going against a good defense. We're hoping, but we saw last year the secondary can be one of the better ones in the league when they're utilized right and guys are in the right places and guys are healthy. So I do think that's a benefit for Caleb Williams as he's going against some guys that are, maybe testing him a little bit. And I think that's a positive thing to look at. You want to eventually see your offense start to do stuff, which I think we have now. We've seen those connections with Rome, and we've seen them with Loveland, and we've seen them with, DJ Moore, a lot of those pieces. So I do think that we have to kind of take this in phases, and we're very early on in the phases of what training camp is right now. So I do think that the shift from the kind of the narrative that was happening last week to this week, the fact that it's already feeling like it's flipping to positive things is very good because it's still very early in the process of kind of all of the onboarding that has to happen for this offense.
Lauren?
Yeah, I think process is the right word here. It's about kind of trusting Ben Johnson and trusting the process here. This is like the whole thing he was brought in here to do. And it does feel like it's silly to expect results right now. Like the the whole point is not to have Caleb Williams look his best by August 1st. It's for Caleb Williams to look his best by September 8th. So they don't need to be a well-oiled machine right now. This is all part of that learning process. And it's fair to like be nervous when, hey, things aren't always perfect. Like, of course you don't like the idea of mistakes and trouble along the way, but that is part of this process. And if you have full faith in Ben Johnson, then you shouldn't really be concerned that a week into practices, things aren't going 100%, but you do want signs of progress. And at least it sounds like we're getting those early stages here of those dots trying to be connected. But what's going to happen is, all right, things are going well, so now let's put a little bit more on his plate, and then he might struggle again and then get better at that. And that's part of this up and down process of growth.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to Ben Johnson obviously has like defended Caleb, I think, very fairly and well. I mean, last week when people were coming at him pretty hard for the struggles, and there was a lot of pretty like viral clips from like Dan Orlovsky and all these people talking about Caleb, and it's going to take him years to develop to be a quarterback now, which I think is a stretch a little bit to say years, but like it's not going to happen overnight. Like we all know it. And Taylor, I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you break the news or had the report about Caleb not being coached last year?
Yeah, I work closely with, obviously Caleb comes down here and trains during the off season. So some of the people that I'm close with and work in the industry work with Caleb Williams in the off season when he is training, and some of those programs that he does down here in Jacksonville, and with a lot of other guys. There's Brock Purdy comes down here. There's Anthony Richardson comes down there. There's a lot of guys that come and train down here in the facilities. And so I heard pretty early on, like before I think Shane was even fired, but I wasn't able to say anything while Shane was still obviously in the building because I just didn't want that to start at that point, and I was asked not to say anything. But then the moment that when he was fired and things started kind of shaking up, everyone was like, okay, well, he's gone now, so if you want to report some of this, go ahead. So I said it pretty early on, but it didn't catch on until like January. I was on another podcast and somebody heard it, and it ended up, that one went pretty viral at that point because Barstool got a hold of it. It was kind of all over the place at that point. But I just reported on the fact that there was, and now this has also spiraled into other things since this has happened, but it was when it comes to the film watching. First of all, it was never a criticism on Caleb, because it wasn't a criticism of Caleb didn't know how to watch film. It was the fact that the part of the coaching that Shane Waldron was supposed to be involved in wasn't there. And so when Caleb did have questions, and that's not saying that Shane never sat down with Caleb and went over anything. I think it turned into this thing that it wasn't. But the fact was that there really were moments where Caleb, and I know this from my sources here, that Caleb called down here and said, I need to hire somebody because this isn't working with me and Shane. Like, I'm not getting anything out of our film watching. There's just something lacking here. And that was one of the many stories that happened. After that, more and more kind of came out. I know some of that from reports that say back at training camp, some of the players were going to the Ryan Poles in training camp of last year saying, this isn't going to work. Like, Shane Waldron is not it. Nobody can, like, there's no connection here between players and coach. And there's like a very big disconnect between what Shane Waldron felt like the offense should do and what was actually being put out there. So that was very early. Some of those things were happening, obviously, before the season even kicked off. And I think it just spiraled out of control. I do think people take some of that and run away with it. People turned it on Caleb at certain things. And then I know Caleb addressed it and he was like, that kind of got out of hand. So it was never a criticism. If anything, it was Caleb got through last season, even despite everything else that was going on wrong around him. So I do want people to know that it was never a criticism on Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's important to bring it up too, is because what we're talking about here is with training camp is he's essentially a rookie again. Like, that's kind of how I view him. He's a rookie with basically, it's almost, last year was like almost like an extended college year for Caleb, and now he's, what they keep saying, it's like drinking out of a fire hose or a fire hydrant, is basically what the Bears are doing right now, what they're trying to implement with the offense. But I think, Lauren, to what you were saying too, is, the fact that just this week there's much more positive things. We're seeing the success. We're hearing about success from media and fans that are there, that they're seeing the results just happen in 1 week. It's everything that Ben Johnson is talking about, that like it's going to be a development. It's going to be a process. It's not going to be perfect. So that's why I think the vibe around Caleb, the Bears, just from 1 week to the next is so much better. And I think everyone that was freaking out can relax a little bit. Right, Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, this is what the players were asking for, right? They wanted to be coached hard. They wanted this to be difficult. I think it would be almost in some ways it would be a bad thing if everything was going 100% perfectly on the offense right now, because they wouldn't be getting pushed as hard as they need to be. Like, I know DJ Moore was just interviewed on I think Bleacher Report, had some kind of crew out there at camp, and like without a moment's notice, his first answer of like how things are with what are things like with Ben Johnson coaching, and he goes uncomfortable. Like that was no pause, nothing, just like, yeah, it's uncomfortable out there, and like that's what they've wanted this whole time. So to me, like this is the kind of like healthy adversity that pushes a team and brings them together, as opposed to the kind of adversity that maybe they were seeing early signs of last year that pulls them apart.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Oh, sorry. I posted something earlier and on my Twitter with this, because when the Bears, this was actually, I think before the Bears even hired Ben Johnson, but I was doing a look around of the possible coaches that the Bears were going to hire. I ended up doing one episode and then they hired Ben Johnson, so I didn't have to do any more. But when I was talking to the guy from Detroit, who he is a podcast for Pride of Detroit, and he went very in depth about how Ben Johnson is during practices and camp. And there were two things that stuck out to me in that conversation. Number one, he said his general mood is pissed off in practice and camp. That's how Ben Johnson is. And then he also used the word prickly, and he said that Ben Johnson is very prickly. And I asked him to kind of, expound on what exactly he meant by that. And he went into depth about how much of a perfectionist Ben Johnson is, and everything from like obviously the quarterback, but to the route running, and how this step needs to be at this exact, your step needs to be exactly in this place at this exact time. And if Ben Johnson sees something he doesn't like, he's going to get angry. He's going to cuss at you. He's going to yell at you. He's going to pull you out of drills. He's going to stop plays. That's how he is. And so he told me this back in January. And so this is something he experienced in Detroit with how he was on that offense. And we've seen how efficient that offense has been the last few years. And they are still seeing that out of Ben Johnson. So I've also been kind of telling people to calm down in that aspect. You want this. You want a coach that is going to stop and say, this isn't right. This isn't what you're capable of way more than what we're putting out on the field. And so we're seeing that. And I think it's good that we're seeing him call out players immediately. And we're seeing him keep to be the Ben Johnson that made the Lions offense what it was the last few years.
All right. So I saw this clip going around from Unsportsmanlike, the ESPN radio show. And they're doing this series where each kind of host on the show is doing the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL with the most pressure on them. And I think only one of the 3 had Caleb on their list. Common names are like Tua, Kyler. JJ McCarthy popped up a couple times just because of his situation, which I don't disagree with because the Vikings are supposed to be awesome. But how much pressure do you guys think there is on Caleb Williams to have a very successful season this year? Lauren, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 different kinds of pressure here, right? I don't think he cares what the outside pressure is going to be. And I think the inside pressure on himself is higher than even what the outside pressure would be. So like, I think he's going to hold himself to an incredibly high standard, and he's going to be disappointed if he doesn't get that. But I also think externally, yeah, there's got to be an expectation of like, hey, Ben Johnson is here to turn things around and fix this. And so, 4,000 yards should be a fairly reasonable thing for a quarterback to hit in 17 games. With an improved offensive line, good weapons, and an offensive coordinator or an offensive play caller that is supposed to be putting him in position to be this really successful player. So like, I think there's going to be a lot of noise around high expectations for him, but I don't think it's going to be anything that's fazed him because he's been feeling this ever since he was like a high school senior at this point.
Taylor?
Yeah, I think that to Lauren's point, the internal, what Caleb puts on himself, I think is more than what anybody ever could, because he's that guy that, we've seen the things of the screenshots of his front screen on his phone. And I think now it's like the Super Bowl, the Lombardi trophy, because that's just like his mindset. And so I always appreciate that of Caleb. He has very strict kind of internal goals for himself as a human, as a person, as a football player, as everything, as a teammate. And that's how he is. And I think I love that part of him. But I do think that there's still pressure in the sense of number one, you're drafted number 1 overall. That's always going to add a sense of a little bit extra pressure. And especially you add on now all of the quarterbacks that also came out in this draft. Jaden Daniels is the talk of the town right now. He's in people's top 10 list for quarterbacks. And so there's always going to be this competition, I think, externally of did the Bears draft the right quarterback? And so I do think that adds a level of it. And then there was a lot invested in this. We mentioned the whole interior of the offensive line's new, and you go and you get Luther Burden and you get Colston Loveland. Maybe the one thing is the running back room that people maybe feel they didn't address high enough or as much as maybe some people have wanted. But outside of that, anything you could have asked for offensively to help Caleb Williams, from a play caller to a line to weapons, has seemingly been fixed. So that adds, I think, a level of expectation too, because all of a sudden they're saying, okay, well, the Bears are doing all of these things to help Caleb and put him in a position to win, which hasn't happened with previous quarterbacks. So you are expecting a season where you have 30 touchdowns, 4,000 yards, and especially with a play caller and a head coach like Ben Johnson, who people feel like should be that next guy, the next McVay, however you want to say it. But I do think that I feel like sometimes you do have to calm it down a little bit, because I do think that you look at the Bears schedule, that adds difficulties. You look at the Bears division, that adds difficulties. You look at we're talking about the scheme that Ben Johnson runs and everything that Caleb's going to be learning on top of developing and unlearning probably some of the things that he got in his brain last year when it came to taking some of the sacks he shouldn't have taken and things like that. So there's a lot of things that have to be fixed and improved and developed, in addition to learning a whole new offensive scheme in year 2 with however many offensive play callers we're on now. So I do think that I think that there's a high amount of pressure on him, but I don't know if he would be saying he's directly feeling that from the outside, or if he cares about that other than the people inside the building with him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because they kind of capped it with a quick discussion that no one from this show, from Unsportsmanlike, wanted to have a super hot take and say Caleb Williams' job is in jeopardy after one more season, which I think would be obviously extreme. But there is the reality too that I think it's fair to point out, Ben Johnson didn't draft Caleb. And if things were to go very poorly and the Bears were to have a top 3 pick and Grant, and Nussmeier and, Arch Manning are sitting there, maybe we're having a different conversation. But I think going into the season, I think he's under a lot of pressure, but I think it's just because that's what Ben Johnson, to Taylor and Lauren, what we've been talking about, that's the kind of coach he is. The pressure, the fire is there. I mean, in the interview that DJ Moore did with Mike Golick, he talked about an extent about how if you get a play wrong, you're off the field. You're getting screamed at. He talked about how he was walking back and he could hear Luther Burden, who we'll talk about in this next segment, getting screamed at by Ben Johnson for just being in the wrong spot. So I think there's a healthy amount of pressure on Caleb this year, but I think just on the team in general, and I think for me the key word there is healthy. I think it's all good pressure. It's not, people freaking out about Caleb Williams. No, there's people that are, but Taylor said relax. I agree. I think we all need to relax a little bit. But I think there's a lot of pressure on this team. But the best part is I think it's all internal and it's all purposeful that they're doing it.
Yeah, I think you could.
Yeah, go
ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was going to go to break, so you talk.
Well, I was just saying, I think you can see it in how Ryan Poles has approached the team building process, right? They've gone from being a team that's so focused on future long-term flexibility to now saying, all right, we're going to put some big money in some older veteran players, in Joe Tooney and Grady Jarrett. These are no longer 3 to 5 year moves, but these are the next 1 to 2 years. We want to actually start doing some real winning now, and they're still building into, they're still being smart about it, but we've seen this sort of transition from purely long-term plays, and now we're doing some short-term immediate stuff now too, without going all in on this year, but saying, hey, we're done with the building back up part. Now we got to start doing some real winning.
All right, we will take our first break here. When we get back, we'll talk about some of the stuff we're hearing also at camp. The offensive line, a focus of conversation. We'll get into that next, about what Ben Johnson said today at camp leading into it, and kind of this construction, because it feels like this puzzle piece is about to be solved. So we'll get to that next year on the Bears Squad Show here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that's where Gametime comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever, and prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I like to use Game Time for, well, pretty much everything, whether it's concert tickets, took my son to see Monster Trucks a couple weeks ago. We're going to see Go Danny this weekend. The dads and moms out there know what Go Danny's all about. We use Game Time to get our tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, so as we're talking about what's going on at training camp right now, obviously the focus of conversation has been on Caleb Williams, but the other one has been the offensive line. And today, Ben Johnson, he said pretty easily here about the left tackle competition. He said, quote, "We're getting more clarity every single day. It seems like Braxton Jones got a lot of those snaps with the first team unit at left tackle." So, Lauren, I'm curious because it feels like a week ago when we did this show, on Friday it felt like Ozzie was really kind of, finding a spot there in the rotation, but it feels like now, just from afar, it feels like Braxton Jones is really winning that left tackle job again.
Yeah, I think as Braxton Jones was still ramping back up to full participation in recovery from his ankle injury, right, that was Ozzie Trapillo's time to shine and separate himself as the guy that, oh, wow, we got to get this rookie on the field because he's just clearly better than what other options are. But now that Braxton Jones is back fully healthy, I don't feel like it should be a huge surprise that someone who's been a 3-year starter at the NFL is better a week into training camp than a rookie second-round pick. Even one like Trapillo that's clearly got a high floor. He looks NFL ready. He's certainly got the body and the physical tools that you like. Like, there's so much to like about Trapillo. And at the same time, like, we're not talking about a top 10 pick on the offensive line. It's a second-round guy. And it's not a disappointment or a bad thing if Trapillo sits on the bench for a little while because there's an established starter already here in front of him. Like, then he gets to develop, and it can be kind of a win-win for the Bears there to still get some value out of Braxton Jones and then have Trapillo take his time and not just have to throw a rookie out there to kind of learn on the fly in a good situation. But still, nonetheless, I like the idea of the veteran being the one that you just feel like a little bit more, you know what you're getting, even if maybe Trapillo, you hope someday, eventually soon, becomes the better player.
Taylor?
Yeah, I think that it is funny how the flip has happened because I felt like I was hearing so much Ozzie for a while, which the guy is a massive human being. And so that is somebody that you would love to see end up panning out because he's just someone that seems super physical, and it's something that you want on the offensive line. I feel like it's been a bit since we've had that offensive lineman where you feel like just adds that. Like, Tevin had it in him, but obviously the injuries just kind of tampered that so much. But Tevin had that feistiness of, like, don't touch my quarterback, and you want that type of guy. I do think that there's a positive. And two things. Number one, having someone to actually push Braxton behind him, because I'm not sure that he's really had anybody where he was scared he was going to lose his job, because it was just kind of like, all right, Braxton is the best on the team, and there really isn't that much competition behind him. I know Amagaji last year, there were glimpses of, like, in preseason, oh, maybe they found somebody here, but I don't know how true that ever was of maybe Braxton feeling like he had the possibility of not keeping his job. And now maybe it's in his head a little bit. Like, they drafted somebody in the second round, and this isn't your coach anymore. This isn't that, it's somebody that, yeah, you got drafted by Ryan Poles, but this head coach, who's very big on his offensive line, is going to ultimately make that decision with Poles of who he wants as those starting five. So I do think that's a positive in having somebody who can truly battle Braxton and kind of push him maybe to a higher level than what we've seen. But I also think that it is good in reality, to your point, Lauren, if you can keep some sort of consistency in front of Caleb Williams, your bookends are probably the best things to keep consistent there. So if Braxton wins that job and he's playing really well, and you have Darnell Wright and Braxton on each side of you, and you have that familiarity with him and Caleb from last year, it's not like you're now having 4 new guys on the offensive line that you're all trying to figure out this cohesiveness. You do have at least a little bit of consistency there in front of Caleb from year 1 to 2.
Yeah, I think unfortunately too, the thing that I think people are so focused on exactly of who wins the left tackle job, but the unfortunate reality, we all know this, I think we just forget it, is that in the NFL, one of these tackles is probably going to get hurt, like at some point, and will miss major chunks of time in the season, if not both of them. Like, guys who haven't stayed healthy all the time. So having that backup there it's good. It's to have a swing tackle, someone that can play potentially both left and right tackle, like if you need it, because you need depth. And that's where I feel like the Bears, for me, it's like it's where it got really bad last year and in previous seasons, where if one guy gets hurt, just the next guy coming up was a disaster. And it just kept snowballing, getting worse and worse and worse. So it at least feels like that so what you were saying, Taylor, is like there's real competition. Now there's some depth in that room. And that's not something I feel like the Bears have had since, like, I don't know. I feel like it's been like 10 years since like the Bears had like legitimate other options in the offensive line room. So I think it's all positive, but it does makes me feel like Braxton is really close to winning this thing for sure.
What, you didn't have faith in Larry Borum as the swing tackle?
No, hard pass.
I do think too, like to your point, Joe, even looking at last year, Braxton, I want to say it was his rookie season where he played like every single snap of his rookie season or something like that. And then he's had seasons where he's struggled with injury. So that has been a consistent issue, and it's something unpredictable. And maybe the Bears have gotten unlucky recently because you finally get somebody in Tevin who, when you feel like he's on the field, he's very good, but he can't stay there. I feel like every single person at some point last year was battling some sort of injury on the offensive line. And so maybe they're a little unlucky, and maybe that streak ends with conditioning and new people in the building. I don't know, because it is a little bit of luck in football of staying healthy and getting those guys through the season. But to have some comfortability in the fact that if somebody goes down, everything doesn't spiral out of control, that does ease you a little bit. And you see other teams go through that. You see that the Philly, no matter what happens to Philly's offensive line, you feel like they just keep rolling, and you want to get to that level.
What's the next like camp battle for you guys? Because if it feels like left tackle is kind of secure, I mean, I'm not even sure like really what the big question mark is across this team on offense or defense about, who wins a starting job over another player. So Lauren, is there anything that you're looking at as you're doing the show every day of like one spot on the offense or defense?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I don't feel like left tackle is totally settled, although it's definitely in the Braxton Jones department. But the other big one, if you will, is the third linebacker spot next to TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds. That there was some thought that fourth-round rookie Ruben Hippolyte might be able to take over that role. I think we've seen a lot of Noah Sewell getting some first-team reps there. I still think we talk about Dennis Allen wanting speed on the defense. I don't know if that's going to be Sewell's job all the way through, but that one's a little less like urgent to make sure that you get squared away as early as possible, the way the offensive line is, where maybe we'll see both of those guys kind of rotate in that role, even in the regular season, where maybe when you get in the red zone, you don't mind having a more physical, slower linebacker like Noah Sewell to kind of stop in a goal line package to try and stop the run. But if you're in base defense at midfield where they might run play action and pass, maybe you want a lighter, faster linebacker and Hippolyte who can read and react a little bit more quickly. So, I mean, it's the next most, open sort of starter battle, but it is a small role and one that doesn't need a super clearly defined, winner very early.
Yeah, I haven't been at camp, obviously. I'm in Florida, but I do think that I have the curiosity of who that across from Jalen Johnson, because I know obviously right now Tyreek Stevenson, that kind of seems like the guy, but there's been some issues there. I think when Terrell Smith's had to come in and play, especially last year, there were moments where you see a lot of good things. So that's one that I'm kind of interested to see how it ends up going this month, because and what they see, what Dennis Allen sees, because that's Dennis Allen's specialty is back there in the secondary. So I'm super excited to see that in general. But how it kind of shakes out, because outside of that, it looks pretty set. And then also, I think the interior defensive line, I know Grady Jarrett so far, it looks like he's just been an absolute leader, and it looks like him and Javon Dexter next to each other. I'm interested in that rotation, though. What does it look like with Shamar Turner and Andrew Billings coming in there? Because Andrew Billings, obviously, especially in the run against the run, is just phenomenal. And you saw that fall apart last year without Billings up there. So maybe that rotation, interior defensive line, and then that opposite Jalen Johnson. Those are two interesting to kind of keep an eye out this month for me.
Yeah, the other one I would say too, and we're going to talk more about the wide receivers in the next segment, but I guess it's just over the next couple of weeks, like what kind of role does Luther Burden carve out for himself? Like what is it really like? Is it a gadget guy? Like, is that all he really is? Is it, kind of what we saw early on from the Lions with Jameson Williams and Ben Johnson's offense, where it was pretty much, hey, you're going to go on the field, you're going to run as fast as you possibly can, as far as you possibly can, and Jared Goff's going to throw it to you. Like, if that's all Luther Burden is this year, it might be to what, we're hearing about Ben Johnson being frustrated and the injury kind of setting him back. So I guess it's not really a competition, but just like what kind of role he can carve out for himself is really the only thing with Burden, because he's going to obviously impact this team. I think it's just a question of to which degree that is.
I think we'll see. And we'll see how this obviously next month goes. But I could see Ben Johnson being super creative with Luther Burden. I could see him in the backfield, catching passes in the backfield. That was something he did in Missouri, obviously. And so I do think that's a very intricate thing that I think Ben Johnson could lean into with him. But to your point, when it's the wide receiver room, I've seen a lot of people tweeting by midseason, Rome's going to be wide receiver number 1. How does this all start to look? Like, who has that connection with Caleb? Who does Ben Johnson kind of start leaning on? Because he's not one of the guys that will just heavily, obviously, I guess it was a little bit different when you had some of the weapons, and how Jared Goff plays in general is different than what Caleb Williams is going to play. So that'll be fascinating to watch. But that's going back to, Joe, to your comment earlier about Dan Orlovsky talking about how long it's going to take Caleb to get this offense and Ben Johnson. I was like, you don't even know what this Ben Johnson offense is going to look like, because he made that entire thing for Jared Goff, and he's going to make this entire thing for Caleb Williams. That's, if we're talking about the genius offensive mind that he is, that's what it's going to look like. But it will be interesting, like week 17, if everybody's healthy, what does that, that target rate look like between those wide receivers and the tight ends? Obviously, you drafted another tight end, and when having Cole Kmet, what does that all look like?
Yeah, I'm interested because of how much this mirrors or doesn't mirror what the Lions did with Ben Johnson's offense. Like when you think about this idea of will Rome Odunze be the number 1 at some point here? Like what does number 1 mean anymore? Because in Detroit, right, that we think about number 1 being that X receiver, right, up on the line of scrimmage, alone, out wide. In Detroit, I mean, that was Jameson Williams. Amon-Ra St. Brown is the Z receiver on their side off the line of scrimmage, and then he moves in the slot in the 3 wide receiver sets. So but Amon-Ra St. Brown got a lot more targets, catches, and yards. So I mean, he doesn't play the number 1 role traditionally, but in the offense, he is the go-to option. And it feels to me like that Amon-Ra type role certainly would be more like what they're asking DJ Moore to do right now. So he would be the number 1 in terms of targets, catches, and yards, but the player who lines up like the traditional outside number 1 receiver might still be Rome Odunze. So how they kind of mesh that together will be interesting to see, and how we kind of define that as the season goes on. Yeah,
I think it's going to be just defined on, it's dealer's choice. Like what Caleb wants and what Ben Johnson likes is what it's going to end up being. I mean, if that's why this hire is so exciting still, because if you think they're going to run the Lions offense last year, that's not what's now. So what you're saying, what will we see from it, I think is totally fair, but it is going to be a totally different offense, because Caleb and Jared Goff are nothing alike in pretty much any capacity. I mean, the athleticism from Caleb is obviously so different. The veteran savvy from Goff is so different than Caleb. So it's whoever Caleb likes more, I think it's just going to kind of fold into being the number 1 guy. But we'll take a quick break here, because something Taylor said about what Luther Burden did at Missouri, we're seeing at training camp with DJ Moore, and I'm very curious what everyone's thought is of DJ Moore in the backfield. So we'll get to that next here on the Bears Squad Show on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. Today's episode is brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football is back. Fire up the group chat and get your draft board ready, and buckle up for a season filled with breakouts, busts, and all the overreactions we live for. It's all going down on Yahoo Fantasy. My fantasy league is all on Yahoo. It's very way too intense dynasty league, but I absolutely love using it. So we're using Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days, giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. That all begins on Monday, August 4th. Stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy League at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. And let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. Taylor, I put Lauren on the spot last week after that read. What's your number 1 fantasy option for the Bears this year? Who are you most excited about?
Oh, that's good. It's honestly a little difficult because we just
And like we literally just talked about
talking.
yeah.
Like I don't really know what it, but I'll probably say Rome Odunze because I have a borderline obsession with Rome, and last year I was like pounding the table, and so I'm ready to see that year 2 Caleb Rome connection.
I think Colson Loveland still. He's climbing for me. Of like I just want to see what it's going to look like. Especially, I mean, look, it's not to overreact to training camp videos, but the connection looks nice in training camp video with Caleb and Colston. But today, on Tuesday, depending on when you're listening to this or watching it, we saw DJ Moore in the backfield with this offense. A very interesting, creative way. I mean, we saw, I think Shane Waldron did some creative things and more Thomas Brown with DJ last year, but I think it goes to what we've been talking about here in that last segment of how the Bears offense can look. And the idea of DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, or Luther Burden taking snaps in the backfield, I think it's very interesting. So Lauren, what was like kind of your initial reaction when you first started seeing that clip out there today?
Yeah, I think initially you're like, oh, wow, this is going to be a cool, fun, new, interesting, different thing. But once you take a little bit more time to look into it and think about it a little bit, like they used DJ Moore in the backfield last year a couple times, and he was in the backfield about as much as Amon-Ra St. Brown was last year. I think DJ Moore had 10 backfield snaps and St. Brown had 14. It was about 1% of their total snaps last season, each of them in their respective offenses. So it's not as though this is going to be some like Cordero Patterson type of role where it's like a huge part of the game. It's more like a gadget wrinkle trick play kind of thing. And I was more surprised that that this isn't Luther Burden, but I understand that like Burden is still catching up and still has a lot to get to before you can start put him in the backfield. But he did a lot more backfield stuff at Missouri than DJ Moore or Amon-Ra St. Brown have ever done in their careers.
Yeah, I think that one of the the most positive thing to me is that DJ Moore can do a little bit of everything. We did see him obviously in the backfield. He took handoffs last year. He'd do checkdowns. He'd do screens. He can go deep if you need him. And that's one of the most positive, I think the best things about DJ Moore is he'll kind of do what you ask him to do. I know there were some viral moments last year where people kind of got a little upset with DJ Moore and his reactions or actions on the sideline. Sounds like Ben Johnson addressed that with him too. But I do think that that's one of the positive things. And I think that maybe DJ Moore is being used into that, to Lauren's point, because that I would expect that to be a Luther Burden role to me personally. So maybe he's just not quite at that level where Ben Johnson wants him to be there, but you still want Caleb getting used to some of the things that maybe you'll be doing. But I read a stat recently, actually, that behind the line of scrimmage, Caleb Williams passer rating, when he targeted DJ Moore behind the line of scrimmage, it was like one of his higher passer ratings, that connection right there behind the line of scrimmage. So you do want to find, it didn't always work. That's the problem. Like he'd catch the ball and then we get negative yards. So you don't want that to happen. And so that's part of what Ben Johnson can bring to this offense is there's things like the screen that you felt like could never work the last 2 years in Chicago. And that's something that that Ben Johnson can get to work. So those are things that I think that you take a new scheme and a new play caller that knows how to call these things at appropriate time and not call like 12 straight and they actually work. And also having the personnel and Ben Johnson fitting the personnel with what he has to that. And so I do think it's going to be Ben Johnson, I think, is also learning through all of this too. But one of the positives is he watched the Chicago team last year, he playing head to head and probably just divisional wise watched a lot of film in general on this team. So he does have the familiarity with Rome and DJ and Caleb and Swift and the pieces that have returned and Komet. So that is a positive to me because he does have a little bit of insight of what these guys are good at and what didn't work last year, or maybe why it didn't work last year. And I think that's the bigger thing is the why it didn't work. And I know that was Nagy's thing, so I hate saying that, but that's not.
No, but yeah, it's unfortunately all the Bears coaches gave us all the cliches, so it's hard not to accidentally double up on them at some point. But Ben Johnson said, Rome Odunze is that, the prototypical X receiver. Like I think it's not like unfair to Rome, but obviously so much of the focus has been on Caleb and his development into year 2. I do feel like Rome gets ignored. So it's kind of the fantasy thing is like, I feel like he's going to fall.
I don't ignore.
Yeah, you don't, but like, I feel like the excitement for like the Rome year 2, and because there's as much pressure on him at the wide receiver spot as there is as Caleb at quarterback. Like, Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously didn't have a great year, but like Malik Neighbors was a monster. Taylor, Brian Thomas Jr. was incredible last year for the Jaguars. Like the rookies last year, like Rome, kind of in a way underperformed because those other guys were so great. So there's a lot of pressure on Rome too this year. He's probably he's right up there with me with players I'm most curious about this year. On a side note, I did love that they threw a double pass in practice. I don't know if you guys saw that one, but
I did not.
He threw it to, Caleb threw it to DJ Moore behind the line of scrimmage.
Oh, I did see that.
DJ threw it back to Caleb. I'm like, I feel like that's Ben Johnson, that's for the fans. Like, that's just to get everyone excited.
I feel like we tried. Okay, maybe I had a bad dream, but I feel like there was a time last year where because didn't DJ throw a pick and then just walked off the field, and it was some trick play that we did, and everyone was like, "What just happened?"
I can't remember if that was last year or the year before, but I do feel like that. I remember that
because it was a really bad pass, and it got picked off, and DJ was just like, "All right," walked off the field, and everyone got mad. But I was like, "Well, he wasn't going to tackle the guy, I guess. I don't know."
Yeah. What's the other thing with the wide receiver room, just quickly, I thought was interesting was they do have Luther Burden doing some punt return and kick return stuff. I think there's for me, there's a lot of excitement there with his athleticism. And I do think when we're talking about Ben Johnson, having to yell at him, take him off the field for being behind, I think that's a really interesting way to use him as a focal point for this team, is that if he's not there offensively, at least you can use him on special teams. Right, Lauren?
Yeah, it's just going to be interesting, what that means for Devin Duvernay. They kind of signed to be that designated man, but it's if Luther Burden ends up being more like a number 4 wide receiver on offense, if Zacchaeus is the number 3 or whatever, then at number 4 you got to be doing some kind of special teams. It's tough to roster 4 guys at receiver that aren't going to be primary big time special teams players. And Zacchaeus will play special teams probably either way, but the point being, he's got to be able to carve out some kind of role there. And if his best ability is with the ball in his hands, punt returning is a great way to do that. I think the bar is so low for the Bears with punt returning. If you can just consistently know when to fair catch it and actually catch it and not fumble, I think that's a pretty good step forward. It doesn't need to be 89-yard touchdown returns all the time.
Yeah, I honestly, I liked Devin Duvernay last year. He was obviously in Jacksonville, and it wasn't the season I think a lot of people expected, because when you looked at his career before that, that was his specialty, was in that return game, and it just didn't really click last year. Granted, things were a mess in Jacksonville too. So I do like him, and I think he's a good return guy. But to your point, if you draft a wide receiver in the second round, you want to see him in some form or fashion. And if that gets the ball in his hands and he can create some things. And also, speaking of that, when they kind of switched the kickoff rules and all of this funky stuff started happening, and I was talking to a lot of people, a lot of special teams coaches were saying that running backs in the new way that the punt returns were happening, or the kick returns kickoffs were going, that it may be beneficial for running backs. And so I know Luther Burden's not a running back, but talking about guys who have that experience in the backfield, but also the receiving side, that may work. And so if you can get those extra yards and get Caleb as close as possible after those situations, then obviously you take it, especially in year 1 for him.
Do either of you guys like the new kickoff rules? I don't. I wanted more. They gassed them up like it was going to be this big, exciting play, and I felt like it was the same thing last year.
I will say, because I talked so much about this during the year last year, and I feel like maybe it wasn't as noticeable because people were expecting all of these touchdowns, but the whole point was to not have as many touchbacks, which touchbacks increased pretty heavily last year. So that what they wanted to prove, and that did work, but now they're trying to move it even farther now if it's a touchback to try and prevent it even more, because I think it was the 35, it was 30 and then now 35 or whatever it may be. So I think they're just trying, not technically, they don't want people to run it back every time. You don't want every team to have a Devin Hester, but you want it to not be a touchback every time, and you want some of these punters to have to maybe pen it a little more, and the punter be able to be more of a weapon. And so I do think that you saw a little bit of that last year. It'll be interesting if that continues or completely dies now that they had a full season doing it. But I think for most people, they were a little bummed because it didn't turn into all this extra explosive big runs from people.
The thing I appreciated about it is it helped special teams coordinators separate themselves a little bit, because it's all right, all of a sudden, we've been doing kickoffs the same way for however many decades. Now there's a new set of rules. Who can be the guys that are most creative and working within these new rules to find different ways to spring guys free? And it wasn't like it produced a bunch of touchdowns, but I saw some different analysis. I don't remember from who. It's been months now. I want to say PFF was doing some of it on which special teams coordinators were blocking things up differently on kickoff returns. So some were putting 2 return men deep, some were putting 1 returner and 1 designated blocker back deep, and like the different variations between how they all wanted to approach it. And they were seeing some measurable results where like the special teams coordinators that were doing it a certain way were averaging more yards per return in theory because of their different approach to how they want to block it up. So I just like that there's a little bit more of a gamesmanship there to kind of figure out, oh, like, can I find some new ways to succeed, as opposed to like, there's only a couple different ways you block the traditional kickoff return and no one's really doing anything that new or innovative or fresh with it.
I want to revisit the DJ Moore thing from earlier that you mentioned, Lauren. So he was doing an interview with Bleacher Report, Mike Golick, and someone else. My apologies. And was asked about how things were like with Ben Johnson, and he immediately said uncomfortable. And then he referenced, the players being yelled at and being pulled off the field. But he talked about it in such a positive way. It's one of those where, like, I feel like if the aggregators get a hold of it, it's gonna look really weird written versus what you hear from DJ. But I'm curious from both your perspectives, what do you view like we're hearing the culture is different? How much does that matter to you guys from watching the Bears from your perspective? Taylor, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think it's huge, and this comes from talking and being around a lot of players and former players are now on Helmets and Heels. Tom McManus is on Helmets and Heels now with us. Former Jaguar, obviously went to Boston College. So he's also a big Ozzie Trapillo fan. So he's really good friends with his dad. So I'm trying to get his dad on one of my pods. But I do think that the way that they speak, it really does matter. And these players, because some of it's accountability, some of it is up to the players. And I think last year the players also did a crappy job on some aspects of kind of not letting all of that negative seep into everything. I think a lot of guys like a DJ Moore, Caleb at times, they kind of wore it on their faces, and you could tell that it was bleeding into other situations. And sometimes you have to say, you are grown men, and you don't always love your bosses. You've got to keep going. You've got to keep grinding. And sometimes you can make it an excuse to say the culture word, I think, and just say culture was bad. So it kind of bled into the locker room and everything we were doing. But at the same time, I do think that in certain aspects, when a coach comes in and holds people accountable and holds players accountable, but also themselves, I do think that helps, because I think the last Eberflus especially, I don't know if he ever, and I don't know their conversations obviously behind closed doors of what he had with these people, but it didn't ever feel like he took full accountability for anything that was happening when things would go wrong. And players like that. Players respect when somebody will take that step up, when somebody higher takes that step up, or if another player says, this was my bad, I should have done this. And so I do think that type of thing really does kind of affect the locker room as a whole. And obviously DJ's been in a lot of negative atmospheres when it comes to his playing career so far in the NFL between the Panthers and the Bears. His time has been kind of, I'm sure, frustrating, because he's gone through a crap load of quarterbacks. This is the first time in his career where the starting quarterback in back-to-back years has been the same for him. And so,
that's crazy.
And week one, it's wild. And so I feel like maybe now, and this is a testament to Ben Johnson, maybe now, like if that's already showing through and the players are already feeling that, then that's massive, because last year at this time, players were asking for a change already. And so to me, that is a big indication.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. The only thing I'm weary about is that, like, we're hearing all the great things. I think we're seeing signs at training camp, but like, I just feel like every time a new coaching staff comes here or any team, they always say, hey, we're changing the culture and we're going to improve the culture. And like Matt Eberflus talked about changing the culture and holding people accountable with the hits principle, right? We're going to go through on film and we're going to watch and make sure that everyone's hustling through practice. And that's how we're going to be bigger, faster, tougher, stronger than everybody else. And it all sounds great. And I certainly have full confidence that Ben Johnson is going to be able to walk the walk in addition to talk the talk. But I feel part of me has just been a little bit burned on this enough before, where it's like, yes, everyone always talks about wanting to change the culture and players feel it at first, but culture is only really tested when there's like, that adversity and things, difficult things that they have to work through. And like training camp struggles are, I guess, a part of that, but like, we don't really know how it holds up until stuff actually goes wrong. They lose a couple of games in a row, and how the locker room bands together. So like I've been encouraged, and I feel like Ben Johnson and the staff have checked every box and said all the right things, and the players, like everything is going in the right direction. It's not to say that it's not, but it's more so we've seen it going in the right direction before, and how it stays in that right direction will ultimately be the difference between the culture actually changing and it just being a little more lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, they're saying all the right things. And I think Ben Johnson's doing the right things by taking players off the field when they're in the wrong spots and they're doing the wrong things like that. It sets this right standard. But Lauren, we talked about this on Friday. Our first show was just that, I'll believe it mostly when a disaster happens, when the Hail Mary happens, when the blocked field goal happens and you lose that game. Because we saw last year how the Bears season just unraveled. And it's like, can Ben Johnson, eradicate that culture in one offseason? And I think the real testament will probably be who's not on this roster next year. It's more for me, it's like that's when we'll really know, like, the culture has changed, like who doesn't fit his style, his coaching, and like who is not here in 2026. I think that's like when we'll really see it get going. But they're all saying the right things. I mean, they got me feeling the right way, at least. So that's good for us, at least. The culture for the fans is better, I hope.
Yeah, and I think that once you get into the season, you really know these things when things go wrong and right. And to your point, when bad plays happen, how are they addressed and how quickly are they fixed? Adjustments, that's something that we haven't seen. I feel like in a game the last, I don't even know how many years, like actual hit halftime and be like, oh, this isn't working, let's change it. I also do think, though, and I don't know if this is just me, but previous hirings last year, the Shane Waldron hiring was so underwhelming. There was no moment last year where I was like, Shane Waldron's going to come in and completely flip this offense. Like when I had my list of offensive coordinators that I wanted the Bears to hire last year, Shane Waldron was very low on mine personally. And same when it came to Matt Nagy, like I was like, cool, I guess. I feel like the most excited I was about a hiring the last several years was John Fox, and that also turned into a disaster. So there's that, because everyone was like, oh, John Fox is going to come in. He took, he went to the Super Bowl. He's going to change everything. And that didn't work. So you've seen the glimpses of guys that have done it before and weren't able to do it here. And then you've just kind of, I think the Bears threw some darts at a dartboard, and we're hoping that some of these coaches, just because they were in Kansas City, were going to fix things. And obviously that didn't work. But Ben Johnson, I think, being under Dan Campbell this last few years, if you want to talk about changing a culture, Dan Campbell is the king of that. And so if Ben Johnson learned anything from Dan Campbell, I hope it's that.
Lauren, anything to add there before we go to break?
No, I think it's spot on. Although the Dan Campbell thing is interesting, because I'm just curious, like, how much Dan Campbell we see Ben Johnson take versus how much we see Ben Johnson kind of go his own path on some.
I know. I'm very interested.
Yeah.
I feel like if I was going to bet, I feel like Aaron Glenn takes more of the Dan Campbell path, like the defensive mindset. And Ben's, I think, I think it's going to be different. Like, you're going to see some remnants, but like, I think it's going to be for sure a little different. All right, we'll take a quick break here. For the YouTube audience, we'll be back in 5 seconds. For the audio listening audience on Apple and Spotify, we'll be back in a minute for our final segment of the Bears Squad Show. All right, so Lauren, I don't know your loyalties here, okay? So we're going to learn about each other a little bit in this segment. I know Taylor, just looking at your Twitter account, I know we're a lockstep. Notre Dame, Cubs.
There you go.
Obviously, last night, Cubs fans, we lost Ryan Sandberg. And I was looking at some of the videos that were being posted by the Cubs and by Marquee and all these different places about what the fans were doing with the flowers and everything and the statue. And just got me thinking, like, as we were getting ready to do the show today, I was like, we don't get to have these conversations enough. I think about the great players that played for this franchise for the Bears. We have a George Halas statue, Walter Payton statue. When the Bears move to Arlington Heights or to wherever else they're going, because we never know what's really going on, put you on the spot. What's the next statue? Who is it? And are you a Cubs or a Sox fan? Or are you a Brewers fan?
Oh.
So, I'm relatively baseball agnostic.
Okay, all right, that's a good answer.
So like I don't have strong. I'll say this: I don't have strong negative feelings towards either Chicago baseball team, but I'm a Milwaukee Brewers guy mostly. Unfortunately, there. But in terms of statues, like it's tricky because there's something to be said about setting a really, really, really high standard for statues, and not just like. And not that the Bears would be close to this, but not just making statues for every important player in franchise history, because then where do you start to draw the line between guy who's really good or whatever? Like what's the criteria you use? So like I like that it's kind of just Halas and Walter Payton. I think, at some point in the future, maybe after Mike Ditka eventually is no longer with us, hopefully decades down the line, given like you're the only Super Bowl winning head coach in team history, and at that point you're no longer alive. Like I like it as a tool for immortalization. That's hard to say, but I like it as that way to help someone live forever that clearly can't live forever but deserves to live forever. So for me, it would probably be him or something in the Gale Sayers Brian Piccolo relationship thing to me. But I don't know that there's like a more modern example like of a player since the 80s that to me like, oh, you got to make the Brian Urlacher. He's too young. I mean, he's still young.
Too young. He's too young for sure to do it. Taylor?
Yeah, it's funny. First of all, Lauren, I think that if in decades down the road, if we only still have one Super Bowl winning coach, I'm going to be very upset. Yeah. So hopefully that changes. But yeah, I think my first thought was Ditka. I feel like if I were to guess a next, it would be Mike Ditka. I feel like he's the Chicago Bears, and that's what it is. And I think he's the coach. It's always going to be that. And yeah, I'm a firm believer though of like not retiring jerseys too early, even in college football. Like it was so weird to me that Colorado already retired both Hunter and Shador's jersey. Like, so you guys, they haven't even played an NFL snap yet. And I get it, like maybe let it breathe a little bit, but I'm like that. So let's give time for things to really, I feel it gets washed away. I feel like it takes away some of the meaning if you just throw up statues to throw up statues. So my first one was Ditka, though. I think that if I were to guess what the next one would be when it's time, it should be Mike Ditka.
Yeah, that was going to be, yeah.
Can I throw a curveball here that I hadn't considered until just now?
Okay.
Not a player, not a coach, but like, is there a Virginia Halas McCaskey statue?
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be shocked especially if the ownership construction stays the same and there isn't, the sale that a lot of people have speculated over the years. That wouldn't shock me. And that would make a lot of sense with like a new stadium to unveil that. And maybe you go kind of owner, coach, player, and then you go two more, you go Virginia and Ditka or something like that. But yeah, Virginia wouldn't shock me if there's something. There'll definitely be something at the new stadium.
I feel like I remember when she died that I feel like I remember somebody throwing out the idea of like, could you add her as a little girl with George Halas, like add
that'd
her
be cool.
Child to George Halas's statue, or like find a way to combine them in a way where it's not like 90-year-old Virginia McCaskey.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think something like that would be so cool and meaningful and sentimental, and it doesn't have to be like some big like. It doesn't have to be like this big like, wow, we're going to worship Virginia McCaskey, but just like have a good appreciation for her role in the team.
Yeah,
I think that would be cool.
Yeah, because the player is hard because the Bears obviously have so many legendary players. It would feel really hard to pick one other person to go up there like with Walter. I don't even know where you start because I think the Urlacher is a point. Like that was the first name that popped into my mind of like the younger, I guess our age group of Bears fans. Like that's the one that stands out the most. I don't know why, just because I hate that he's disrespected by the Hall of Fame so much. Part of me just wants to like give me a Peanut Punch statue somewhere around there. Just give Charles Tillman his due. But yeah, I think player is hard. I think Ditka would be the next one. And honestly, I feel like they're going to do it whenever this thing happens.
I feel like part of the statue thing for me is like a cultural relevance and how well they're known in the sense of like Halas has this sort of like larger than life history of helping start the NFL. And of course, Walter Payton and all of the legend around him. Like, I don't know that since the 80s, we've had a player who's sort of their stature is beyond just football. Right. And I think there's still time for somebody to do that as they, I think even like, Charles Tillman works his way up in the FBI. Like, could he become a larger than life figure that is almost like the statue is not just for what he did on the field, but for what he represented more broadly. Like I think Walter and Halas, and then I think that's where I think like Brian Piccolo and Gale Sayers reached that status too of like, it's not just, this is the best football player or coach, but like Ditka was a face, a recognizable, Saturday Night Live, the Da Bears stuff, right? It's a cultural moment, not just wow, this was a really good era in Bears football.
Where do you think the stadium is going to be? Okay. See, since we're all new with doing these shows together, it's like I can ask so many questions. Where's the stadium? Are we going to Arlington? Is it going to Arlington Heights, or where do you think they're going to get this thing done? Any guesses?
I do not know. it always feels like the moment I think, yeah, it's going to Arlington Heights, something pops up that's like, well, maybe not. And so I don't know. And I'm obviously not up there, so I'm not as in tune with like every conversation that's being had. Like down here in Jacksonville, during the whole process of the stadium, we're involved in everything. So it's like you get to hear a lot more, and you're hearing what the people in the city are thinking and feeling, and the votes that go into that and everything. So it's harder for me to determine or kind of guess. But I don't know. It feels like it's just this back and forth battle that I don't know when it's going to quite end, because it seems like there's people with a lot of say that really want to keep it in Chicago, and there's people with a lot of say that say it's going to be able to be better and thrive in Arlington Heights or elsewhere.
Yeah. I would like to stay in Chicago if possible.
Yeah, that feels like the ideal outcome, but I don't know. All along, it's felt to me like Kevin Warren has done a good job of just trying to pit the two sides against each other and wait for who's going to give more leverage. And so when the city of Chicago is giving them stuff, then they're starting to go there to try and convince Arlington Heights to offer them a better tax deal. And I don't know. To me, it feels like there are more obstacles to staying in Chicago than there are to Arlington Heights. I think from a legislative standpoint, they need more from the state and local governments in Chicago than. Whereas like Arlington Heights has a little bit more autonomy to just offer the Bears more of what they want. So like, I don't think it's set in stone by any means, but if I had to bet my money today, I would lean on Arlington Heights in the suburbs.
I'll tell you, last year, coming up on a year now, probably on episode 1 of Hard Knocks, when they showed Kevin Warren designing the bar or whatever it was on Hard Knocks, I was like, oh, they're going to break ground soon. No, they're not. They're not going to do any of that. All right. She is Taylor Dahl. You can find her on Twitter at TayDahl1010XL, Making Monsters, Second City Gridiron podcast. Lauren Cox, of course, the host of the daily Locked On Bears podcast here on the channel. My name's Joe George. We'll be back with you on Friday. If you are a Cubs fan, I will be live after every single Cubs game as well on the Locked On Cubs YouTube channel for our post-game shows. And we'll be doing post-game Bears shows as well, starting in the preseason, Lauren and myself and others. So thank you for watching. We will talk to you guys on Friday. Have a good one. Peace.